We think of food as comfort, culture, and joy. Honey sweetens our tea, chocolate brightens our mood, and bread is the very symbol of life itself. But not too long ago, these same foods carried much darker associations. Some were used in bizarre medical treatments, others were feared as poison, and a few were even linked to death rituals. What we now see as everyday staples once had histories so unsettling you'll never look at your plate the same way again. Let's count down 7 perfectly normal foods with truly disturbing past uses. Number 7. Honey as corpse preserver. Today, honey is something we drizzle on pancakes or stir into tea, but in the ancient world, this golden sweetness had a far darker reputation. Both the Egyptians and the Chinese discovered that honey wasn't just delicious, it was also an incredible preservative. Its natural antibacterial properties meant it could keep flesh from rotting, so it wasn't unusual to find honey used in embalming practices. In Egypt, bodies were sometimes sealed with honey to help slow down decay, essentially making it a partner in the mummification process. But the strangest story comes from ancient China, where records describe something called the mellified man. According to the legend, an elderly volunteer would consume nothing but honey until his death. Afterward, his corpse was placed in a stone coffin filled entirely with honey, left to steep for decades. The result, a supposed human honey medicine that could be consumed as a cure-all for injuries and illness. If that sounds like a nightmare recipe straight out of a horror movie, that's because it basically is. Of course, historians debate whether mellification ever truly happened or if it's more folklore than fact. Either way, it shows how people once looked at honey not as a sweet treat but as something that could bridge the worlds of life, death, and medicine. So next time you're spreading honey on toast, just remember once upon a time, it might have been spread on a corpse. Number 6. Chocolate as medicine. Today, chocolate is the universal symbol of sweetness and love, the kind of thing you buy on Valentine's Day or snack on when you're stressed. But in the medieval and early modern world, chocolate wasn't just a dessert, it was treated like a powerful drug. Imported from the New World, cacao was often brewed into a bitter, spiced drink that only the wealthy could afford. Physicians prescribed it for everything from fatigue and digestive problems to nervous disorders. Some even thought it worked as an aphrodisiac, calling it a miracle cure for flagging passion. But chocolate's mysterious reputation also stirred suspicion. In Catholic Europe, church leaders debated whether drinking chocolate during fasting was a sin, and whispers spread that it might be a kind of witch's brew. The exotic flavors, its stimulating effects, and its ties to Aztec rituals gave it an aura that was both luxurious and unsettling. For a while, chocolate sat in this strange limbo: was it medicine, magic, or temptation? By the 17th century, chocolate houses popped up across Europe, much like modern coffee shops, but the drink still carried undertones of danger. It wasn't until sugar and milk transformed it into the sweet bar we know today that chocolate fully lost its association with sorcery and dubious medicine. So next time you unwrap a bar of chocolate, imagine a time when that same treat might have been prescribed for madness, whispered about as a love potion, or feared as a devilish indulgence. Number 5. Potatoes as witch tools. It's hard to imagine a world without potatoes, French fries, mashed potatoes, chips, their comfort food on every continent. But when potatoes first arrived in Europe from the Americas in the 16th century, people didn't welcome them with open arms. In fact, they thought these odd-looking tubers were straight from the devil. The plant's appearance didn't help. Potatoes are part of the nightshade family, which also includes toxic plants like belladonna. Their gnarled roots and strange underground growth made people suspicious. Some communities even believed eating potatoes could cause leprosy or other mysterious illnesses. Doctors of the time had no idea about nutrition, so the potatoes' link to disease seemed plausible. In certain regions, the potato's reputation went darker still. Folklore claimed witches used them in sinister rituals, burying them in fields to curse crops or grinding them into potions. Villagers feared that this devil's root was more a tool of sorcery than a food source. It was banned in parts of France and even used as evidence in witchcraft trials. Of course, the irony is that potatoes would later become a staple that saved millions from starvation. By the 18th century, when famine loomed, governments promoted potatoes as a miracle crop. and their dark reputation slowly faded. So the next time you bite into a French fry, remember the same potato you're dipping in ketchup was once seen as the food of witches feared, rejected, and even accused of carrying curses. Number 4. Tomatoes as poison. Tomatoes are the heart of Italian cooking today. Think pizza, pasta, or a simple caprese salad. But rewind to 16th and 17th century Europe, and this bright red fruit was considered a lethal danger. In fact, many people nicknamed it the poison apple or the wolf peach. The problem wasn't the tomato itself, but the way it was eaten. Wealthy Europeans often dined on pewter or silver plates, which contained high levels of lead. Tomatoes, being acidic, would leach the lead right off the plate. After a rich meal, diners sometimes fell gravely ill or even died not from the tomato, but from lead poisoning. To ordinary people, though, it looked like the tomato was cursed. Its sinister reputation was reinforced by its family ties. Tomatoes belonged to the nightshade family, alongside plants like belladonna and mandrake, both infamous for their toxicity and association with witchcraft. With their glossy red skins and strange resemblance to forbidden fruit, tomatoes seemed like something you shouldn't trust. For centuries, Europeans avoided them, thinking they brought disease or death. It wasn't until the 18th century that tomatoes shed their cursed image, becoming a cornerstone of Mediterranean cuisine. Today, they're symbols of warmth and flavor, but for generations, they were the food people feared would kill them. So, the next time you twirl spaghetti with marinara, remember that comforting sauce was once thought to be a deadly poison lurking on the plate. Number 3. Nutmeg as a drug. Today, nutmeg is something you sprinkle into holiday cookies or a cozy cup of eggnog. But back in the 16th and 17th centuries, this humble spice was viewed as a substance of power, danger, and even death. Europeans believed nutmeg could cure the plague, ward off evil, or send you into vivid hallucinations. Taken in large doses, it actually can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and even organ failure, which is why in the early modern period, nutmeg wasn't just a seasoning, it was practically a drug. Its rarity made it even more dangerous. At one point, nutmeg was so valuable that a handful of seeds could buy you a house. Nations went to war over the tiny Banda Islands in Indonesia, the only place on earth where nutmeg grew naturally. The Dutch and English slaughtered entire communities in their fight to monopolize the trade. Blood was spilled so that the wealthy could sprinkle nutmeg on their desserts. In some cases, nutmeg's potency was weaponized. Stories circulated of nutmeg being slipped into food or drink to poison rivals, since a high enough dose could kill. What we now casually grate over apple pie once carried the weight of life, death, and empire. So next time you dust a little nutmeg over your latte, remember this spice once fueled colonial wars, deadly overdoses, and a centuries-long obsession that cost countless lives. Number 2. Ketchup as medicine. We think of ketchup as the most ordinary condiment in the world. Burgers, fries, hot dogs, all dripping with that familiar red sauce. But in the 19th century, ketchup wasn't a condiment, it was a cure. At the time, the sauce wasn't even tomato-based. Early recipes came from fermented mushrooms, walnuts, or anchovies. When tomatoes finally entered the mix, that's when things got strange. Enter Dr. John Cook Bennett, an ambitious physician and businessman. In the 1830s, he began promoting tomato ketchup as a miracle medicine. According to his claims, it could cure indigestion, jaundice, rheumatism, even depression. He didn't stop there. He dried and pressed the sauce into ketchup pills and marketed them as a pharmaceutical wonder. The hype caught on fast. People bought ketchup not for flavor, but for health. Apothecaries sold it alongside real medicines, and families stocked it as a cure-all. Of course, ketchup had no magical healing powers. By the 1850s, the medical fad collapsed, exposed as little more than a scam. But the story doesn't end there. Instead of disappearing, ketchup reinvented itself. By the late 19th century, companies like Heinz marketed it as a food product, not a drug. That's how it found its way onto dinner tables around the world. So the next time you squeeze ketchup onto fries, remember that red bottle once promised to heal your body and mind. In reality, it cured nothing except perhaps an empty stomach. Number 1. Bread mixed with human ashes. Bread has always been more than food. Across civilizations, it symbolized life, sustenance, even divine blessing. But in times of famine and war, this sacred staple took on a horrifying twist. Historical records from Europe and parts of Asia describe moments of desperation where ashes, sometimes from the bodies of the dead, were mixed into flour to bake bread. In some cases, the ashes were used symbolically, tied to ritual beliefs that consuming them would honor the dead or grant spiritual strength. In other, darker accounts, it was simply about survival. When grain ran out, starving communities turned to whatever could bulk up the dough. Even the remains of loved ones were not spared. The image is grotesque bread, meant to nourish and protect, transformed into a vessel of death. Eating it blurred the line between ritual and cannibalism, between devotion and despair. For many, it wasn't just about filling empty stomachs, it was about clinging to life when every other option had vanished. Over centuries, bread has stood as the staff of life. Yet this chapter in its history reminds us how fragile that symbolism can be. What we now slice, toast, and butter so casually once carried the weight of famine, ritual, and horror. So the next time you break bread at a table, remember this food has not always been comforting. In the darkest of times, it became a grim reminder of just how far humanity will go to survive. What seems like ordinary food today once carried stories of death, superstition, and desperation. From honey preserving corpses to bread mixed with human ashes, history shows us that nothing is ever just normal. Every bite we take is layered with centuries of strange, often disturbing traditions that shape the way we eat now. If you enjoyed uncovering these unsettling truths, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. There are countless more bizarre stories hiding behind the most familiar things.